I'm going to try something very different here. First of all, I want you all to do a favor for me. I think this conference has been absolutely stupendous, terrific, marvelous, and I'd like you to stand up and give a hand to the organizers, please, and that way you'll get some blood circulating before the next speakers. Thank you very much. I've certainly learned a lot about malaria. I'm not a malariologist, and I'm really honored to speak with you today. I want to kind of lay some groundwork about eradication. We'll talk a little bit about where we are and some of the challenges, and then I get to introduce our final speaker, who is probably well known to most Rotarians in the room. So the title of this is actually swiped from our last speaker, Jennifer Jones, because she had a theme during her year, which was Imagine Rotary, right? And so imagine a world without malaria. So what I'd like to start with is talk about eradication, elimination. In reviewing our history in global health, and I've been in this shtick, if you will, for 40 years, there have been 6 global eradication attempts in modern history. And the target is very important, and I think so. I wanted to just outline the steps that when you're thinking of launching this huge global effort, which you're already actually launched and you're actually in the middle of, from what I hear, you want to identify a feasible and measurable target. You'll notice when Axel gave his presentation, for example, that they reduced the under 5s, but they didn't hit the target. They got down to 23%, but their target was 10%. So they had scientifically set a target that will make them strive and give them something to shoot at, and that's what really is essential. Then you look over the successful programs, which we've been able to do today, hear about the tools, consider how scalable all of this is that we're trying to do. We want to present policymakers with information on return of investment. And that's something that was touched upon when we talked about how many billions of dollars would be saved. And I'll talk a little bit about that because I looked into the money on this because it's absolutely critical. And then embrace broad partnerships across organizations. Speak with one voice. Alan McGill was mentioned in one presentation here, and he actually came to the foundation when I was also an officer, and I went to his first retreat of the malaria team just to see what the new guy is like and to listen to him because he came in from a military background at Walter Reed. And the one thing he emphasized on his team was that rivalry would not be tolerated. Everybody on the team had to work together. So I would say rivalry within the malaria movement cannot be tolerated. You need a collective, single voice and collective leadership moving forward. So deeply engage with communities, that's part of what Rotary can help you with. Raise funds and consider broadly where we're going to do that. The public sector is not going to be the place. So we need new strategies, we need new appeals, we need new business cases to present maybe to global business that comes into a poor economy for an extraction. And you say to them, well, you know, we'd love to give you access to whatever it is, copper, but we have a population with a problem that you're going to want to employ, and so we're going to ask you to subsidize our Ministry of Health. I mean, usually in my experience overseas in West Africa, the Ministry of Health is way down the hallway from the President's office or the Chief of State's office or the financial guys up here that actually broker the business deals. Get in the middle of it and let's start making noise. So how does it work with Rotary? And I've been thinking about this for a long time because in my career, I noticed that, you know, you can have top-down initiatives in global health where very important people tell you, this is what we're going to do next. And then you have community level will, right? But this is the part that Rotary does. It's right in the middle. It's that green thing there. And it's your link between the high level and the community level, lives in the community, knows the community, but also has that ability to bring those levels together. That's why Rotary is so powerful. That's why, to me, frankly, it's one of the very few viable models for delivering global health services as we move forward. So let's talk about the money a little bit. What's the burden? We talked about what the burden is. And, you know, global health, having health in your population, I have always seen as sort of enabling legislation. Once you have health, your population can be politically active, they can be artistically active, they can be industrious in their jobs, they can be productive. But if you don't have health, then all of that is only a dream. So the direct costs of care we've talked about, the indirect costs, which is the cost of transporting a loved one into care, or absenteeism from the job, the cost of reduced productivity, and I would say not just people who are in the fields or people who are on the line in a factory. Think about the intellectual contribution that you're losing by not bringing folks into the problem solving we need in the modern world. So what do we know about costs? Well, we heard a figure of about $130 billion in savings annually if we got to the 90% reduction in 2030, I think it was, with the malaria reduction goals. That's very similar, because I did the math on the back of a napkin, to what Jeffrey Sachs put forward back 25 years ago, which was 1.3% of GDP for sub-Saharan Africa would be recouped if you could actually get the malaria dividend. Malaria, of course, affects 196 million under 5-year-olds across sub-Saharan Africa. But the cost studies that we have vary by country, and there's very diverse methodology. And so I would suggest that a very smart thing, and Rotarians are pretty good at this because a lot of us are business people, is to really take a look at what in country you're working in, you know, what's the cost really to your population and to the businesses that you're working in. In Tanzania, for example, 39% of spending on health, or 1.1% of their GDP, goes to malaria. So also I wanted to touch upon integration, because that was something Nairisi left with you. You know, think integration, integration, integration. What we're talking about is Rotary's areas of focus, and if you go around the circle and you look at peace building, well, if you want to broker peace between two neighboring countries, maybe malaria is a good collaborative vehicle to do that if you have troubles with border malaria. Disease prevention and treatment is obvious, but then water and sanitation and hygiene. There's a water summit tomorrow where we're going to talk about wash away polio. Maternal and child health, that's fairly apparent, but education and literacy in schools about how to avoid and prevent malaria, huge. And of course, economic community development, and then the environment. So I wanted to mention one other thing, because when I co-chaired the COVID-19 task force with Ravi Kavindran, who I think you saw in an earlier video, we struggled because COVID had become extraordinarily politicized. And the vaccine, therefore, was politicized. And so when we put out our statement on behalf of Rotary International that we support vaccination, of course we did. It only made sense. We also put this statement forward because we wanted to make it very clear. Rotary is not a political organization. We are a humanitarian organization. And so this was the statement we put forward that was supported by the Board of Trustees. And I think it's very apparent. But it's something you should keep in mind just in case malaria starts to get politicized. Who knows? And just to remind you, we are 1.25 members. We have 45,000 clubs. And in sum, combating malaria is going to be a really long road. You may or may not kind of get there. If you look back over the 6 declared eradication efforts, 2 of them worked: smallpox and a disease of ungulates in animals. Those were the 2 that were successfully eradicated. Polio's still ongoing. It's a lot trickier than I think any of us thought it would be, but we're almost at the end. So what happened to guinea worm and what happened to yaws? Those were the 2 other eradications. Well, guinea worm was moving along, and actually they're down to 15 cases, but they found guinea worm had a new host, and that was the dog. So unfortunately, that changes your eradication ability. And then with yaws, it was based on penicillin in the 50s, mass administration of penicillin. And it just sort of, it worked very well where they did it, but they didn't have the money. Oh, and I should mention, the 6th eradication was, of course, malaria in the 1950s. And that was begun in like 1955, and it went to 1967, and it was based on DDT, and it was based on chloroquine. So you didn't have the tools, you didn't have the diagnostics, and you didn't have the money. And so that one, although it made huge differences in highly impacted economies, it was not a successful eradication. So as you move forward, I also would suggest looking at some of that history to look where the potholes are as you follow the road. The humanitarian benefit of your work will be enormous. We already know that. Rotarians are people of action, and I think Rotarians are up to the task. But now I get to do something really exciting. I get to introduce somebody who doesn't need any introduction. Jennifer Jones was the first woman president of Rotary International, 2022 to 2023. She comes to us from a media and a law background, but she was an amazing leader, is an amazing leader. And not only that, but here's the thing. She emphasized how important partnerships were. And after her year, she actually allowed her partner, Nick, to become a district governor. Who does that? Anyway, it's a great pleasure to introduce Jennifer Jones. Please give her a big hand.